A decorated Navy SEAL returns home from deployment to find his house being seized by his own HOA president over a mailbox that was the wrong shade of beige. What happens next will absolutely blow your mind. This former Special Forces operator wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA dictator steal his home, and his revenge? Pure genius. Stay until the end because the courtroom showdown will leave you speechless. If you love epic neighbor justice stories, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell for Neighbor Wars HQ because we're diving deep into the craziest HOA nightmare ever documented. This is the absolutely true story of Marcus Patterson, a Navy SEAL who served 3 tours overseas defending our freedom only to come home and face the fight of his life against the most vindictive, power-drunk HOA president you could possibly imagine. What started as a simple paint color dispute escalated into a full-blown legal war that exposed corruption, fraud, and abuse of power so egregious that it made national headlines and changed HOA laws in an entire state. This story has everything: military heroism, David versus Goliath justice, courtroom drama, and a twist ending that proves karma is absolutely real. Marcus had purchased his modest 3-bedroom home in the Sunset Meadows community just outside San Diego in 2018. It was perfect for him, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 young kids. The neighborhood seemed quiet, well-maintained, and family-friendly. The HOA fees were reasonable at $150 per month, and the rules seemed straightforward enough. Marcus figured it would be the perfect place to build a life after years of dangerous deployments. He had no idea he was moving into what would become his personal combat zone, and this time the enemy wore khakis and carried a clipboard instead of weapons. The HOA was run by a man named Richard Steinberg, a retired middle manager who had found his true calling, wielding absolute power over his neighbors' lives. Richard had been HOA president for 7 consecutive years, running unopposed because he had systematically intimidated anyone who dared challenge him. He had a particular talent for interpreting the HOA bylaws in whatever way suited his personal vendettas. His board of directors were essentially his puppets, 3 elderly residents who rubber-stamped whatever Richard wanted because they were terrified of being his next target. This man had literally driven families out of the neighborhood through relentless fines and violations. One family received 43 citations in a single year for infractions like grass blades exceeding regulation height by 1/4 inch and garden gnome displaying unapproved facial expression. For the first year, Marcus and Jennifer flew under Richard's radar. They followed every rule meticulously, kept their lawn perfect, and stayed out of HOA politics. Marcus was deployed for 8 months of that first year anyway, so Jennifer handled everything alone. But their peaceful existence came to a crashing halt in June 2019 when they decided to repaint their front door. The existing paint was peeling badly, a safety issue with small children who might ingest paint chips. They chose a beautiful navy blue that matched several other homes in the neighborhood. They even checked the approved color list and confirmed navy blue was explicitly permitted under Code Section 4.7 of the HOA guidelines. 3 days after painting the door, Marcus found a violation notice on their doorstep. Richard claimed the blue was too vibrant and demanded they repaint it within 72 hours or face a $50 per day fine. Marcus was confused because the color matched the sample chart exactly. He called Richard to discuss it, trying to be diplomatic and respectful. Richard responded by screaming at him over the phone, calling him an entitled military brat who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Marcus, a man trained to stay calm under enemy fire, was stunned by this unhinged response over a door color. He calmly explained he had followed the rules precisely and asked which specific rule he had violated. Richard hung up on him. The fine started immediately, $50 per day, every single day. Marcus submitted a formal appeal to the HOA board as outlined in the bylaws. His appeal included photos proving his door color matched, approved samples, testimony from 3 neighbors confirming other homes had identical colors, and citations of the exact bylaw provisions he had followed. The board hearing was a kangaroo court. Richard didn't allow Marcus to present his evidence, constantly interrupted him, and the board voted unanimously to deny his appeal after a 5-minute deliberation. Marcus realized he wasn't dealing with reasonable people following rules. He was dealing with a tyrant who saw his military service as a personal insult. Marcus repainted the door a neutral beige to stop the bleeding on fines. He had already accumulated over $1,500 in penalties. But Richard wasn't done. Not even close. This was personal now, and Richard had found his target. Over the next 6 months, Marcus and Jennifer received violation notices for increasingly absurd infractions. Their mailbox was 3 inches too far left of center. Their welcome mat was non-compliant textile. Their porch light was 4 lumens too bright. Their car was parked 7 inches over the garage door threshold into the driveway, which apparently violated some obscure rule nobody else was cited for. Every violation came with fines. Every appeal was denied. By December 2019, Marcus and Jennifer owed the HOA over $8,000 in accumulated fines and fees. Marcus was preparing for another deployment, and the stress was destroying his family. Jennifer was having panic attacks. Their kids asked why the mean man kept putting papers on their door. Marcus tried reasoning with Richard one final time, offering to pay a reduced settlement amount to clear the air. Richard laughed in his face and told him he should have thought about consequences before disrespecting the HOA. Marcus realized Richard was deliberately targeting them, likely because Richard resented Marcus's military service and the respect it commanded in the community, something Richard's middle management career never earned him. Then Marcus deployed again in January 2020. He was overseas serving his country, putting his life on the line, while Richard escalated his campaign of harassment to truly evil levels. With Marcus gone, Richard saw his opportunity. He began filing liens against Marcus's property for the unpaid fines. Jennifer discovered this when she tried to refinance their mortgage and learned their home had over $12,000 in liens against it. She was working part-time as a teacher, raising 2 kids alone, and now facing this nightmare. She tried to negotiate with Richard, even offering to pay $3,000 immediately if he would forgive the rest and stop the violations. Richard refused and told her that military families shouldn't live in premium communities if they can't afford to follow the rules. While Marcus was dodging enemy fire in the Middle East, Richard initiated foreclosure proceedings on his home. Yes, you heard that right. This HOA president was trying to size the home of a deployed Navy SEAL over paint colors and mailbox positions. Jennifer only discovered this when a foreclosure notice was posted on their door in April 2020. She immediately called Marcus, sobbing and terrified they would lose everything. Marcus, sitting in a combat zone, had to console his wife over a satellite phone while processing that some power-drunk HOA president was stealing his home while he served his country. He promised her he would fix this, but he felt utterly helpless being thousands of miles away. Jennifer found an attorney, Daniel Rodriguez, who specialized in HOA disputes. Daniel had heard of plenty of HOA horror stories, but this one made his blood boil. A military family being foreclosed on during deployment over manufactured violations? This was beyond the pale. Daniel took the case immediately and began digging into the HOA's records. What he found was absolutely stunning. Richard had been running the HOA like his personal fiefdom and slush fund for years. Daniel discovered that Richard had funneled over $100,000 in HOA funds into his personal accounts through fake maintenance contracts with companies he secretly owned. Richard had been embezzling from the entire community, and he used aggressive fines and violations to generate the revenue he was stealing. But it got worse. Daniel found that Richard specifically targeted families he perceived as threats to his power. Military families, lawyers, accountants, anyone with the knowledge or resources to challenge him received disproportionate violations. Daniel identified 7 other families who had been driven out of the neighborhood through Richard's tactics. One elderly couple, both veterans themselves, had been forced to sell their home of 20 years after accumulating $30,000 in HOA fines for violations like unapproved bird feeder and offensive garden statue, which was literally a ceramic angel. Richard had created a pattern of abuse and fraud that had destroyed lives for nearly a decade. Daniel filed an emergency motion to halt the foreclosure and launched a full legal assault. He sued Richard personally for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. He sued the HOA board for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He contacted the local news media, and suddenly, Marcus's story was everywhere. Navy SEAL faces foreclosure while deployed because of HOA mailbox dispute was a headline that made people furious across the entire country. The story went viral. National news picked it up. Senators and congressmen started making statements. Veterans organizations rallied behind Marcus. Richard had poked the absolute worst possible hornet's nest. The public pressure was immense. The HOA board, finally growing spines, voted to remove Richard as president and suspend all pending violations and foreclosures pending a full audit. Richard, characteristically, refused to accept his removal and tried to continue operating as president. The board had to get a restraining order against him to keep him away from HOA business. Meanwhile, the forensic audit Daniel ordered revealed the full scope of Richard's corruption. Over $140,000 embezzled over 8 years. Dozens of families overcharged or fraudulently fined. Maintenance work that was never actually performed but paid for with HOA funds into Richard's shell companies. Marcus returned from deployment in July 2020 to find his case had become a national sensation. He was overwhelmed by the support but just wanted his family's nightmare to end. The legal battle continued through the summer and fall. Richard hired an expensive attorney and tried to claim he had done nothing wrong, that all the fines were legitimate and the financial discrepancies were accounting errors. But Daniel had built an airtight case with paper trails, testimony from other victims, and forensic evidence of deliberate fraud. The trial began in November 2020 and lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every single day with media, neighbors, and veteran supporters. The testimony was devastating for Richard. Witness after witness described his abuse, his threats, his manufactured violations. Expert witnesses explained how he had embezzled funds through elaborate schemes. Former board members testified that Richard intimidated them into compliance. Jennifer gave heartbreaking testimony about receiving foreclosure notices while her husband fought overseas, about her children's trauma from the constant harassment, about panic attacks and sleepless nights. Marcus testified about returning from combat zones where people were trying to kill him, only to find the greatest threat to his family was a HOA president who couldn't handle someone not bowing to his authority. He testified about satellite phone calls with his terrified wife while he sat in a forward operating base. He described the betrayal of serving his country while someone tried to steal his home over a mailbox position. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge appeared emotionally affected. Richard's attorney tried to paint him as a dedicated volunteer who was just trying to maintain property values, but it fell completely flat. Richard himself took the stand and made things exponentially worse for himself. He was arrogant, defensive, and showed zero remorse. At one point, he actually said that Marcus should have just followed the rules like everyone else, and that his military service didn't give him special privileges. The audacity was breathtaking. This man was sitting in court facing fraud charges for stealing $140,000 and embezzling from his neighbors, and he was lecturing a Navy SEAL about following rules. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Richard liable on every single count: fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of power. The damages were astronomical. Richard was ordered to pay Marcus and Jennifer $275,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. He was ordered to repay the HOA $140,000 in embezzled funds. He was ordered to pay damages to the 7 other families he had driven out of the neighborhood, totaling another $400,000. The total judgment against Richard exceeded $1.2 million. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. The district attorney filed criminal charges based on the evidence uncovered in the civil trial. Richard was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. He eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial and was sentenced to 6 years in state prison. The man who tried to foreclose on a Navy SEAL's home over a mailbox went to prison as a felon. The justice was poetic and absolute. The 3 board members who had enabled Richard's abuse were also sued and settled out of court, agreeing to resign and never serve on an HOA board again. The entire Sunset Meadows HOA underwent complete restructuring. They adopted new bylaws with strict oversight, term limits, financial transparency requirements, and protections for homeowners against arbitrary fines. Several families who had been driven out by Richard's abuse were able to return or receive compensation for their losses. Marcus and Jennifer used part of their settlement to pay off their mortgage completely. They used another portion to establish a legal defense fund for other military families facing HOA abuse. Marcus became an advocate for HOA reform legislation, testifying before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections against abusive boards. His testimony was compelling and effective. California passed the Military Family HOA Protection Act in 2021, providing special protections for deployed service members and their families against foreclosure and excessive fines. Several other states followed with similar legislation. The story became a book, then a documentary that aired on a major streaming platform. Marcus and Jennifer were invited to speak at veterans events and HOA reform conferences across the country. They used their platform to expose HOA corruption and push for stronger accountability. Richard, meanwhile, served his prison sentence and was released in 2026, completely bankrupt, disgraced, and unemployable. He lost his house, his retirement savings went to pay judgments, and his wife divorced him during his incarceration. The man who tried to destroy a Navy SEAL's family over a door color lost absolutely everything. The most satisfying part of this story isn't just Richard's downfall, though that's certainly gratifying. It's the systemic change that resulted from Marcus refusing to be intimidated. The legislation that now protects military families in multiple states, the HOA reforms implemented in communities across America, the awareness raised about HOA abuse, all of it came from one Navy SEAL standing up to a bully and refusing to back down. Marcus could have just paid the fines, repainted his door, and lived in fear like Richard's previous victims. Instead, he fought back and changed the system. This story perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with HOA culture when it goes unchecked. Petty tyrants wielding disproportionate power, rules weaponized for personal vendettas, zero accountability, and homeowners living in fear in their own communities. But it also shows what happens when someone with courage and resources fights back. Richard Steinberg thought he was untouchable, that his little kingdom of Sunset Meadows would bow to him forever. He never imagined the man whose mailbox was 3 inches too far left would be the one to bring his entire corrupt empire crashing down. Today, Marcus and Jennifer still live in Sunset Meadows. Their doors painted a beautiful navy blue, approved by the new, transparent, accountable HOA board. Their mailbox is wherever they want it to be. Their kids play in the yard without fear of the mean man with the clipboard. And every single time Marcus walks past that navy blue door, he remembers that standing up to bullies, whether they wear enemy uniforms or khakis and carry HOA bylaws, is always worth it. Some battles are fought overseas with weapons. Others are fought in courtrooms with evidence and testimony. But they're all worth fighting when you're defending your family and your home. If you love this story of epic justice and HOA karma, make sure you're subscribed to Neighbor Wars HQ because we bring you the most insane, outrageous, and satisfying neighbor dispute stories on the entire internet. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a like if you think Richard got exactly what he deserved, and comment below with your own HOA horror stories. Have you dealt with a power-hungry HOA president? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to support the channel and help us bring you more incredible content like this, check out the links in the description. Remember, justice might be slow, but it's absolutely real, and bullies always eventually face consequences. This is Neighbor Wars HQ, where we prove that karma is undefeated. See you in the next video.